Hello, everybody. Difficult to know how to start here. I've had a very long relationship with land in art, and I'm going to whiz through this fairly quickly because we are short of time. But I thought I'd just start off with a series of monoprints which date from quite a long time ago, just illustrating the fact that although I'm interested in landscape painting, I'm not so much interested in what it looks like, but more what it feels like to be there, and particularly in Wales, where I live, certainly, there's a very high horizon, and you can spend a lot of your time looking at the landscape and not actually ever seeing the sky. It's very enclosed, it's quite nurturing. I'll come back to that if I've got time later. But I'm interested in how the land sort of grows and is constructed, and how it all fits together. These are just drawn monoprints on fairly large pieces of paper with some surface manipulation and colouring. I go back to my relationship with Stiwdio Maelor goes back quite a long time. I was actually the inaugural artist in residence here when it was a bit basic.
Thank you, Alison.
Like there was no stove, and I slept in a bedroom with no door.
And a camp stretcher.
Camp bed, for those of us who are not Australian. It was great, and I have been coming back more or less on and off ever since. But about the same time of that, there was a project running with the Gas Gallery in Aberystwyth called Maps and Makers. Okay, right. And the very first open day that Veronica had, I was working in a studio here on what was a sort of a map on a very large scale, remembering the walks down the Dyfi Valley, working on tracing paper with ink. And there's something very comforting, again, about being enclosed in the work. If the work's as big as you are, you sort of become part of it. And this was quite a big work. The maps are not, obviously not real maps. You couldn't navigate anywhere with them, and the symbols in them are not consistent, and they're not supposed to be particularly graphic. Although looking at this evening, I thought I could see a figure in the front. It wasn't supposed to be there. Veronica and I also did a project together called the iaith and a tir, which literally translates as the old language in the land. The old language in the land.
The old language still lives in the land.
Yeah, but a iaith and a tir just means it's there. And Veronica had, or has an interest in the indigenous languages of Australia, and made a sort of dictionary of Gurnai, Welsh and English. And so we made a lot of work. And this is interesting, my point of view, where I live in Wales. When they say glass in Welsh means blue, but when they say tir glass, they actually mean grassland, which is green. I thought that was really quite an interesting thing. This is a mixed media print. I usually start off with something like a fairly rough screen print or an etching or something like that, and then I layer up and work onto it with my trusty John Bull printing set for the text. So it's really mixed media. It's got a little bit of everything. We also did some paintings. This one is called Gwent or Wind. This one is called Oleon or Traces, based on the fossils. And Paul, I don't know why I'm giving this talk because Paul's already actually given half of it. This is based on the fossils in my the stones in my chimney breast in my house. And this one is called, I think, Kevin Trevlech, and this actually has got a horizon and some sky in it. Another very long landscape was a project run by the University of Aberystwyth Advanced Celtic Studies and Glasgow University, looking at the writings of a Welshman in the 18th century, Thomas Pennant, who, instead of making the grand tour of Europe and going to Italy and Greece and places like that, went around Wales and produced an amazing book writing about his travels, but also he had a tame artist, an artist servant, who went with him. He corresponded widely and collected as much information as he could. And this all went into a book, which now we would probably refer to as a deep map. I probably won't have time to talk about deep mapping, but if we come back, I could answer questions. It's a very interesting concept on investigating what lies below the surface and a sort of a holistic approach to the land, if you like. Thomas Pennant actually rode through the village where I live, so I literally retraced his footsteps, walked down the tracks that he'd walked down, and produced another huge map, and was surprised because you can imagine doing it in a studio, you can only actually unroll about 1.5 meters at a time. So I was very surprised when I unrolled the whole thing to realise that it was actually quite representational. Very briefly, a trip to Sunbury Head, which is at the absolute north of the British archipelago. It's in Shetland, 70 degrees north. I spent a month living in a lighthouse cottage. An amazing experience compared with Wales, where the landscape is around you all the time. Some travelogue pictures follow. Shetland in March in 2017. Amazing place. Sea and sky. I was literally blown away. And I found it very difficult to make work because it was just so vast and I couldn't handle it. It was also a very nicely tidy, well-painted cottage, and it was very difficult to do big splashy work. So I spent a lot of time looking at the patterns made by the sea as the sound comes in, painting these. And all I could really do in the way of printmaking was to make tiny, tiny prints on big pieces of paper, which really sort of said it all. It was very difficult. And when I got back to Wales, it was so claustrophobic, and it was green, and there were so many trees, and it was a different experience. It took me months to settle down and do large-ish paintings based on the hillsides again, drainage channels in the peat, and the incredible geology. There's a northwest, there's a Shetland geopark, which is a globally significant area. What have we got here? And if I've got time, I'll just go very quickly through this. I did a project with the University of the Highlands and Islands. It was a standalone distance learning module. And I decided I would do an intensive look at a very ancient landscape, where I live, about 20-25 miles from where I am. And I made a little preliminary recce with a camera and a sketchbook. And a week later, we were locked down and I was stuck. I could do nothing. I had to do the whole thing from memory. Here's a little map of the place. It's stuffed with archaeology. There are stone circles, dolmens. There's a Roman road you can see. There are medieval fields. It's an amazing place. So I did a map, more mappish than previous maps. I couldn't paint. I could paint, but I couldn't. Sorry. Carry on. Sorry. They're heckling again. I had great difficulty making decisions about painting. I was trying to do a long, thin painting, and the rotten thing wanted to be round, and I couldn't make it go long. It just had to be round. Couldn't decide about the colour. So I carried on in black and white. And because I couldn't see any visual cues, I was putting in contour lines, which are entirely imaginary, and stuff off the Ordnance Survey map, like the trig points and the heights above sea level. Well, that's good, because I can see there are a couple of people from this project actually in the audience. A project I'm involved in the moment, there's a little group of us who are based around the Welsh Marches, English Welsh Marches, which for people who perhaps not in the UK is the term for the boundaries between the countries, England, Wales, and also Scotland, although it's not used quite so much for Scotland. If you talk about the marches, it's usually the borders between England and Wales. There's a group of us led by Emma Aldridge, a printmaker. So give a plug to Emma because she works very hard for this. And we meet and mostly meet on Zoom at the moment, but we meet and we walk and we talk about art and we make work and we have lunch and we have coffee and we have a good time, but we also make work and we've had some exhibitions. The project's called Printmakers Pushing the Boundaries, which is nicely ambiguous. It's very difficult to be radical if you're making work that's going to be put in a frame and screwed onto a gallery wall. So I've been pushing myself to make more collaged work and to actually make the work a bit more three-dimensional, well, not really three-dimensional, a bit more relief, as well as the depth of the print process, but to actually make the prints themselves collaged, and they're about the walk. There's often a line through them, and that's the walk. And again, they start off with, in this particular one, a screen print of just sort of messy bits and things, and then they're built up on top of that. Sometimes I start off with a colograph plate or an etching plate, and I think, oh, I could edition this, and I do loads of backgrounds, and then I sort of get a bit stuck, and I get sidetracked into developing one image, and I end up with monoprints or monotypes. But I'm always kidding myself that I could make an edition. The title says it all, actually. Earthig is a National Trust place, and it's got very interesting paths. You can see that these two could have been a series of two. It's ever so green where we live. It's this is Llangollen, and the river, and the movement of the walk, and so on. Canals. I'm not very good at straight lines. I like landscape, but town walks really I've had great difficulty with. So these are really